Hello. This sermon audio is a ministry of the Town Church in Fort Collins, Colorado. If you would like to learn more about us, how to connect, or how to support us, go to our website, thetownchurch.org. While listening to the Bible preached is a healthy part of our spiritual formation, it is not the whole picture. So if you aren't a part of a local church, we encourage you to prayerfully commit to a local body of believers where you live. We're glad you can join us, and we hope God uses the following sermon to reveal more of His glory to you.
All right, if you have a Bible, go ahead and grab it and turn to the book of Ruth. If you don't own or don't have a Bible, there's some on the table in the back. If you don't own one, we'd love to give that to you as a gift. It is the very Word of God, and so it would be a privilege of us to give that to you. Ruth is in the Old Testament, so if you're looking for it, it's in the Old Testament, which is the front half of your Bible. You've got the first 5 books of the Bible, then you get to Joshua, Judges, and then Ruth. So make your way to the book of Ruth. We're spending 5 weeks in this very short book of the Bible. This is week 3, so if you haven't caught up on those, you can certainly listen to those online, read through those. It's a book that is sandwiched in between this time period of the judges, a group of leaders that God put in place to walk His people out of the oppression that they were facing because of their disobedience and walking them away from that back to God. It was a time period when everyone was doing whatever they wanted to do, whatever felt good, whatever seemed good to them. It was a period of time where God's own people didn't have a king. They didn't have a leader who was over them, leading them well. And even though a king had been promised to them, that king had not yet been appointed, and so there was rebellion and there was chaos among God's people. That's the setting for the book of Ruth, and the book begins by telling us not just that was the setting, but that there was also a famine in the land for God's people. They were starving. There wasn't enough food, and so we meet a guy by the name of Elimelech in the very first pages of the book of Ruth. And Elimelech took his wife, Naomi, and 2 sons to look for food. They took off to a place that historically had been an enemy of God's people. They go to Moab. So Elimelech took his family to Moab, and when they get there, when they arrive, Elimelech dies. The husband of Naomi, the father of these 2 boys, dies. And his 2 sons, before this all goes down, his 2 sons marry Moabite women, and so there's hope for them in the land. There's hope that their family name would go on, but not long after that, those 2 sons die, leaving Naomi and her 2 daughters-in-law to figure out what to do next. And so last week, we saw that Naomi had heard that God had provided food for His people back in their land in Bethlehem, and so she takes off. Now, put it all in context. 10 years, Naomi is living in Moab, a foreign place, a place of God's enemies, and she is now on her way back. One of her daughters-in-law, Orpah, decides not to go back with her, but to stay in her land and to worship her gods. But Ruth, the other daughter-in-law, is committed to Naomi. And not just committed to Naomi, she is committing her life. We see it in the pages. She's committing her life to God. She's committing her life to His people and to their land and to the ways of the people. And so chapter 1 ends with Naomi and Ruth making their way back to Bethlehem. Now, I won't bog us down with the grief, again, that they must be experiencing, but I do want to remind us that that is a part of the setting. That they're grieving. It's a time of loss. Naomi is, she's back in her homeland, but certainly feeling alone and uncertain about what to expect and what's going to go on. She left 10 years previous to this feeling like she was on the right track. She left with what she thought was a full life, and she's returning empty. Uncertain of what will happen. No males in her life at all for provision or stability or carrying on the family line. She's grieving the loss of her husband and her 2 sons, and the only person by her side is a woman from Moab who was not yet a follower of God, but she's growing in that. It's a bleak time for Naomi. It's a bleak time for her family line. And the very last verse of chapter 1 gives us a little bit of foreshadowing that there might be some hope in the future. Look at the very last verse of chapter 1. We looked at it last week, but I want to settle in there as we begin. The very last sentence of that chapter says, "And they came to Bethlehem at the beginning of barley harvest." Now, why is that detail there? Why would the author feel it necessary to give us the detail of the farming seasons? Right? I mean, we don't talk like that, do we? Did you watch the Super Bowl last week? You know, in a season where there wasn't much farming. We don't talk in ways like that. Why would the author give us that kind of detail? Other than to invite us in, the reader, into the hopeful expectation of what God might do next. Unless it was to remind us that God is near, that he's present, that even in the grief that these two women and the grief we experience, he's present and he's active and he's there, he's near. Even when we cannot begin to comprehend what he's doing and why he's doing what he's doing, even when we don't feel that God is near at all, he's showing us he's present and he's active. I think that's exactly what the author is doing for us, the reader, to just keep us moving along. Maybe there's hope, preparing us for what we're about to see of God. And while we cannot always see what God is doing, and while we won't always be able to comprehend what God may be up to in our lives, he's absolutely present and active. He's powerful and he's engaged in every detail. In fact, the way that many people would describe that active presence of God would be to say that's the providence of God. Are you familiar with that term? The providence of God. I thought about that term and began to think through, like, how do we define that? Where do we go for that? So I did some research, did some searching, and came to the Heidelberg Catechism, a catechism that you all were probably reading as well this week. I went to that catechism, and a catechism is something that was put together by the church back in the 1500s, this question-answer sort of back and forth to teach the community of faith what it was to know God and follow him. So it was used in schools and in churches. This format, this question back and forth was given. And so question 27 says this: what do you understand by the providence of God? Or what is the providence of God? And the answer is this: the almighty and ever-present power of God, by which God upholds as with his hand heaven and earth and all creatures, and so rules them, and that leaf and blade, rain and drought, fruitful and lean years, food and drink, health and sickness, prosperity and poverty, all things, in fact, come to us not by chance, but by his fatherly hand. Now, that's beautiful to allow that to soak in. Maybe not easy to understand. You may have to chew on that some, but it's a beautiful truth that God is powerfully present at all times in all things, the good and the bad years, prosperity and poverty. Nothing is by chance. All things are from his fatherly care. So can I ask us this morning, are you open to that truth? That all things, at any time, are under the fatherly care of God? Not just are you open to that truth, but I'll ask this: does that truth then compel you to worship? Does it move you to worship? That there is nothing outside of God's hand. Does it move you in that direction, or does it push you away? I could understand that. Even what you're walking through right now is from a Father who cares, who loves, who extends mercy, grace, and compassion. It doesn't mean that we understand it. It doesn't mean that we even like it. But he's present and he's active. Now, hear this, I'm not saying, does that horrific, tragic event in your life cause you to worship? That's not what I'm trying to get you to do. Hey, look at the bright side, that tragic thing that you're experiencing, that should cause you to worship. That's not what I'm asking. I'm not saying that. I'm saying, does the truth that there is a loving Father who knows all things and sees all things and cares for you in the midst of those hard things, does that draw you into worship? It may not mean that you understand it all or like it all, but does the fact that there is a loving Father who cares for you draw you in that way, that he's near, that he doesn't allow anything to happen by chance? This is what we see in the book of Ruth, and I think especially in chapter 2. So here's how it goes. When the two women roll into Bethlehem, Naomi, bitter, hurting, needy, somewhat hopeful, but still experiencing the pain, there is a God who is present and active the entire time. And he still is. I want us to look at verse 1 of chapter 2. It says, now Naomi had a relative of her husband's, a worthy man of the clan of Elimelech, whose name was Boaz. And Ruth the Moabite said to Naomi, let me go to the field and glean among the ears of grain after him in whose sight I shall find favor. And she said to her, go, my daughter. So she set out and went and gleaned in the field after the reapers, and she happened to come to be to the part of the field belonging to Boaz, who was of the clan of Elimelech. I'll stop right there and I'll push us into this. I think what we see in this is the providence of God in our plans. The providence of God very clearly in our plans. My remote's not working, so there you go. The providence of God in our plans. He's present. He's active. He's upholding all things in his powerful hand, even the seemingly mundane tasks and details and events in our lives. And here's how we see it. The author begins to tell us that Naomi's deceased husband had a relative who was a worthy man, an honorable man, probably a wealthy man, a good man. His name is Boaz. And the author is letting us in on something the characters will soon learn. So remember how chapter 1 ends? Right at the end of barley harvest. And then chapter 2 begins telling us about this man, Boaz, but doesn't really give us a hint of why. So just tuck that little detail away. Boaz is a relative. Remember, Ruth and Naomi have likely come back to nothing. They've come back to a place that has been ravaged by famine, but now there's food. Naomi has been away for 10 years. It's likely she's maybe even been forgotten or shoved aside, at least from the thoughts and ways of the people there. From the memories of the people in Bethlehem, Naomi is sort of set aside. They're trying to figure out, these two gals are trying to figure out now what normal life is going to be like. In some ways, they're probably extremely confused. I can almost guarantee they're emotionally exhausted. If you've experienced tragic hardship or grief, the adrenaline and shock can be helpful to prop you up for a season, but there's also normal life right in front of you that you have to step into. It's in that context that Ruth says to Naomi in verse 2, the younger daughter-in-law to the mother-in-law, let me go out and try to figure out our food situation. And so Naomi agrees to her plan and sends her on her way. And we're told in verse 3 that Ruth went to the fields behind the harvest workers. And she does what? I want you to look at it. The end of verse 3. Happened to come to the field belonging to Boaz. Now, this is just everyday, normal kind of life for them, trying to take the next steps needed to just live and endure through, the grief that they're experiencing, but also just the sustenance. We can't just stop In the midst of grief, you got to keep moving forward. You can't just call it quits. You can't just give up. There are everyday tasks that continue on, and you have to do them. You have to step forward. And so for Ruth, she felt the responsibility to care for her mother-in-law, and she made a commitment to her. Remember, she made an oath to her saying, God can do whatever he needs to me if I don't care for Naomi. And so for Ruth, she gets up and gets out of bed and decides, I have to make things happen. We have to step forward into this life that's right in front of us. The normal everyday moments of what's next. Have you been in that place? And let's not just put it on grief or on tragic things. Like just the discouragement of life. And you wake up and you think, what are my other options? I can't just call it quits. I've got to keep stepping forward. And there are times when we just put our heads down and we move forward. Some tragedy, some hardship, some discouragement, some deep grief, some pain. And all you want to do is nothing. All you want to do is binge watch the 8 seasons of the Andy Griffith Show, right? Not because you like that show, but just because it's there and I don't know, why not? You can't and you won't step aside from the things that are right in front of you that have to be done, the real and normal everyday life that's right there. The tasks don't stop. The details are still there to be figured out, and we feel that. But friends, can I remind us, God is not absent from that moment. We may feel the discouragement, and we may not want to step forward, but God's in that. He's present, the providence of God in our plans and the details of everyday life and the mundane but necessary stuff of life. He's present. Of course he is. There's a lot in these 3 verses, just 3 quick verses that I think we've got to understand to really get a handle of what's happening. The author calls her, I don't know if you noticed this, a couple times he's done this, Ruth the Moabite. Did you see that? Ruth the Moabite, meaning, I think this is what the author is trying to tell us, Ruth, the one who is a foreigner in this land, who has no rights to this land or what the land produces. Yeah, that Ruth tells her mother-in-law that she's going to go out to try to find the favor of some Israelite who's an enemy of Moab, find the favor of some Israelite landowner so that she can pick up some scraps of what has been left behind. And the word that's used, I think it's used some 12 times in this chapter, glean, over and over. It doesn't mean farming or harvesting. She's going to glean from the field. That's not what it means. It's this hopeful collection of what might be dropped that she could scavenge and take for her own. Now, Ruth isn't going to glean outside of the providence of God. This is all under the umbrella of what God is actively involved in and invested in. And here's how we know that. Because back in Deuteronomy chapter 24, there's this law from God that God says, when you reap your harvest in your field and forget a sheaf in the field, you shall not go back to get it. It shall be for the sojourner. It shall be for the fatherless and the widow, that the Lord your God may bless you in all the work of your hands. Do you see it? God has set up in his providence a way for those who are passing through, who don't have fathers, who don't have husbands. Someone would provide for them in their need. God had set up a way for them to glean from what had been left behind. The providence of God in our plans, in our details, in the everyday events of our lives. And we may not see it. But these things don't just happen. Your ability to pay your utility bill doesn't just happen. Or you may say, well, no. I worked hard to make that money to pay that bill. And I'll say to you, yes, you did. You absolutely did. You worked with the ability that God gave you, in a job that God allowed you to have, to earn money in a place where the value of money still exists, at least to some extent, to pay the price for a utility that God gave you as a gift. It's all God. doing those things. These are the everyday kinds of things for us, but we cannot forget that God is present. He's active, he's powerful, he's there. He's in that. We can't miss it. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't luck. The way the author seems to say this is almost this tongue-in-cheek in verse 3. And she happened to come to the field of Boaz. As luck might have it, she stumbled into the field of Boaz. The wealthy, honorable, good relative of Elimelech, she happened to stumble into that field. This is an everyday event. I got to go get some food for me and my mother-in-law. The providence of God in our plans. And I've often heard people who will say, maybe you've heard this too, or maybe you groan when you hear this. I've heard people who say, hey, listen, don't do that. It's silly to pray for that right parking spot to open up. I'm going to circle around. God, would you do that? Would you open that spot up? Or it's silly to pray for your football team to win. Don't do that. God doesn't care about that. And to some extent, I agree. Sorry. God doesn't care about your Chiefs, right? But I don't think we can say God wasn't in that. Does that make sense? So like as silly as you might think, oh, that's silly to pray for that spot or that team or whatever it is, maybe. But it's not that God wasn't invested somehow in that. It's untrue to say that God wasn't in the events of that parking spot. It doesn't mean that some profound thing will happen because, yeah, you got that spot. Maybe, probably not. But does it mean that God's somehow absent in that moment? No. It may not be something that we would spend a lot of time drilling down to figure out what did God mean by me getting this parking spot. You may never know why that parking spot opened up, but it wasn't outside of what God was doing as the one who is over all things all of the time. So, what does that lead us to? I think a couple things. I think first, it has to lead us to a greater awareness of God's presence in everyday activity. Do you have something in your life that just triggers for you? How's God here? What's God doing? What's he up to? What's he doing in my life? Can we wake up to this reality that God is present in everything that is going on? He's present, and I'm confident he desires to see us to see more of his presence as we're made aware of it and looking for it. So I think first, it's got to lead us to a place of seeing that. And then secondly, it has to lead us to a greater awareness, from a greater awareness to a greater desire to then worship him. If God's present and active in this, I may not understand what he's up to, but he's present. And that leads me into worship. He's near. The providence of God in our plans. And the chapter continues. Look at verse 4. It says, and behold, Boaz came from Bethlehem. And he said to the reapers, the Lord be with you. And they answered, the Lord bless you. Then Boaz said to his young man who was in charge of the reapers, whose young woman is this? And the servant who was in charge of the reapers answered, she is the young Moabite woman who came back with Naomi from the country of Moab. She said, please let me glean and gather among the sheaves after the reapers. So she came, and she's continued from early morning until now, except for a short rest. Then Boaz said to Ruth, now listen, my daughter, do not go glean in another field or leave this one, but keep close to my young women. Let your eyes be on the field that they are reaping, and go after them. Have I not charged the young men not to touch you? And when you're thirsty, go to the vessels and drink what the young men have drawn. And she fell on her face, bowing to the ground, and said to him, why have I found favor in your eyes, that you should take notice of me, since I'm a foreigner? But Boaz answered her, all that you have done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband has been fully told to me, and how you left your father and mother in your native land and came to a people that you did not know before. The Lord repay you for what you have done, and a full reward be given you by the Lord, the God of Israel. under whose wings you have come to take refuge." Then she said, "I found favor in your eyes, my Lord, for you have comforted me and spoken kindly to your servant, though I am not one of your servants." And at mealtime, Boaz said to her, "Come here and eat some bread and dip your morsel in the wine." So she sat beside the reapers, and he passed to her roasted grain, and she ate until she was satisfied, and she had some left over. When she rose to glean, Boaz instructed his young men, saying, "Let her glean even among the sheaves, and do not reproach her. And also pull out some from the bundles for her, and leave it for her to glean. And do not rebuke her." We see the providence of God here as well. And I think what we see is the providence of God in our kindness. And by our kindness, I know that may seem confusing, by our kindness, what I really mean is in the kindness of humans as it reflects and mirrors the kindness of God. It's all over these verses. I want to just point it out as we quickly walk through them. Boaz stands out as a significant reflection of the kindness of God shown to us. We're told in verse 4 that Boaz came out to the field to bless his workers. They responded in blessing to him. This is a man who cares for those who work for him. That's just in a little aside. He cares for the people who work for him. He blesses them. They bless him. And he asks his workers in verse 5, "Who's this woman?" She's hanging around, and the foreman of the job says, "That's the young Moabite woman. She came back with Naomi from Moab. She's asked if she can glean in our fields. She's been working hard all day, just a little break." And so Boaz goes to Ruth in verse 8 and begins to extend kindness right away, first offering protection. "Stay in my field. Stay close to the young women who work for me." It was likely in that day that the abuse and misuse of women by manual workers was prevalent. Remember the time period? This was a time period that people were doing whatever they wanted. Whatever seemed good to them. They're still in that time. It was a free-for-all rebellion in that moment. But Boaz says, "Hey, listen, I've already talked to my workers. Just stick with my women. No one will touch you." And he adds to that, not just that, but he adds on top of that, "If you're thirsty, you can drink the water that my workers are drawing out for themselves, but you can have some of it." Boaz has extended kindness and compassion and protection for Ruth in some pretty extravagant, culturally shoved aside kinds of ways, and Ruth knows that. In verse 10, she falls to her face. She bows in honor to Boaz, saying, "Why are you being so kind to me? I'm a foreigner." Well, here's what's going on. This is why Ruth would say that. Ruth likely knew at this point what God's law had communicated in Deuteronomy chapter 23. That's where we see it. God says, look at this, "No Ammonite or Moabite may enter the assembly of the Lord, may gather with the people of God, may be around or near the people of God, even to the 10th generation. None of them may enter the assembly of the Lord forever, because they did not meet you with bread and with water on your way when you came out of Egypt. You shall not seek their peace or their prosperity all the days forever." That's pretty explicit. You shall not be near people who are from Moab. Ruth is not supposed to be allowed to be a part of God's people at all. The Moabites had gone against God's people. They had not extended kindness to God's people in the past, and Boaz has now extended kindness to protect her as one of his own. That's radical. That's counter-cultural kindness to a foreigner. And Boaz responds, "It's because of how you have extended kindness to your mother-in-law. Since the death of your own husband, you're grieving in your own place, and you're extending kindness to your mother-in-law. I've heard all about you. You've left your father and your mother and all that means for you. You've given that up, and you've come to an unknown people and to an unknown culture." I'll say it like this. The kindness of Boaz has been extended to Ruth in part because her kindness had been extended to Naomi, and all of that is a reflection of God's kindness toward us, especially those who do not deserve to be invited in. So Boaz communicates as much in verse 12. He says, "May the Lord repay you for your kindness, Ruth. The God of Israel reward you. the one under whose wings you have come to take refuge. That's beautiful. Whether Ruth knows it or not, Boaz, I just picture Boaz as this big, strong guy who manages a bunch of workers in a field, and he's not afraid to bring it down to some poetic language. You've come under the protective wings of a bird. This imagery is this caring mother bird who hides her young from the rain or from enemies. Ruth, you've sought refuge here with our God. You're invited in. And Boaz continues to extend kindness to Ruth in verse 14. He says, come eat with us. You can have some bread, and not just bread to go, not just a baguette on the street wrapped in newspaper, go on, but join us. In fact, you can dip your bread in the wine. More likely what that was that dipping sauce. You know what it is. Warm bread comes out, that olive oil and balsamic vinegar in there. Would you like some Parmesan cheese? Tell me when. It's that. Oh man, I want that. I want that for our communion bread. Anyway. It's that you can come in and eat. That's what he's getting at. You can be with us. In a sense, Boaz is saying to Ruth, we've got this covered. You're a part of who we are. And he says, even as you go out to glean, he tells his workers, pull out some from what you've already harvested. Leave it out for her. Do not rebuke her. Do not send her away. We've got this for you. Just come and pick it up. It's like a grocery pickup. Scan that QR code, wait for them, she'll be there, they'll be there for you. The burden of the work has been lifted. Boaz, extending kindness beyond what the law expects, beyond what the culture expects. The law of God says to show kindness in this way, and Boaz says, I'll show more kindness than what the law requires. The providence of God is shown in the kindness that's extended. So what's that lead us to? Again, I think a few things we can take away and respond here. Reading through the interactions of Boaz and Ruth show us very clearly that God is present. In the kindness extended to us and the kindness we extend to others, all of that is a reflection of how God has extended kindness back then to us. Boaz is absolutely a reflection of God's kindness to us. Let me just rattle through them. Just like Boaz moved toward Ruth, God moves toward us. Much like Boaz made sure to protect Ruth from the harm and harassment of the enemies, God stands to protect us. Like Boaz offers undeserved water to Ruth, we receive the undeserved essentials of life from God. Much like Boaz inviting Ruth, the Moabite, in, God has invited us, his enemy, in to be near him. Much like Boaz lavished good gifts on Ruth around a table she did not deserve to be at, God gives good gifts to us until we are satisfied. Not just that, but he lavishes gifts on us in an overflowing way, that there would be leftovers. Much like Boaz then continues to lift the burdens of the work from Ruth, God gives freely, requiring nothing from us in return. In fact, Jesus says that burden's lifted. And the kindness of God reflected in Boaz is not the only way that we see it. In fact, we see it in people toward one another. Ruth has extended kindness to Naomi. Ruth bows in honor to Boaz. Boaz blesses his workers, that his workers bless him. The providence of God is seen in the kindness that we show to one another. God is present. He's active. His love has been extended. In fact, the very mark of those who are God's is on us. Jesus says, a new commandment I give to you, that you love one another. Just as I have loved you, you also are to love one another. By that, all people will know that you're my disciples. If you have love for one another, if you extend that loving kindness toward others, this is how we're known, friends. God's powerfully active and he's present in this extension of love toward us. And when we imitate that love toward others, we're known to be his. We're inviting others under the protective wings of a loving God who has loved us first. providence of God is seen all over this passage. His active involvement in every detail is all over chapter 2 of Ruth. And it continues on. Look at verse 17. We'll finish it out. It says, so she, Ruth, gleaned in the field until evening. Then she beat out what she had gleaned, and it was about an ephah of barley. And she took it up and went into the city. Her mother-in-law saw what she had gleaned. She also brought out and gave her what food she had left over after being satisfied. And her mother-in-law said to her, where did you glean today? And where have you worked? Blessed be that man who took notice of you. So she told her mother-in-law with whom she had worked and said, the man's name with whom I worked today is Boaz. And Naomi said to her daughter-in-law, may he be blessed by the Lord, whose kindness has not forsaken the living or the dead. Naomi also said to her, the man is a close relative of ours and one of our redeemers. And Ruth the Moabite said, besides, he said to me, you shall keep close by my young men until they have finished all my harvest. And Naomi said to Ruth, her daughter-in-law, it is good, my daughter, that you go out with his young women, lest in another field you be assaulted. So she kept close to the young women of Boaz, gleaning until the end of the barley and wheat harvests. And she lived with her mother-in-law. The providence of God and the plans that we make is clearly evidence. The providence of God and the ways that we extend kindness to one another and the ways that we see the reflection of God's kindness to us. And we see here the providence of God in our provision, the way in which we experience that. God is present for Ruth and Naomi in how he is providing for all that they need and so much of what they want. In fact, verse 17 tells us that Ruth gathered until the evening and walked away with an ephah of barley. Now, the exact measurement of what that is debated. Some will say it's 40 to 50 pounds. Others will say it's enough to feed 50 men. You remember David's dad, Jesse, sends him back to the front line to his brothers with that measurement, and it's enough to feed 40 to 50 or 50 men. Whatever the case is, wherever you land on how you define that, what has been provided because of the kindness of Boaz, here's the point, it's abundant. Here's another point, Ruth is strong. Ruth gives it all over to Naomi. And she's got leftovers from her meal, a little doggy bag. She gives that over. After I've been satisfied, here's what I have left over. You can have it. Naomi says, where in the world have you been? Where did you glean? Who was there? Who took notice of you? Because whoever that is, he's a blessed man. He took notice and he's provided so much. And Ruth said, yeah, his name was Boaz. And Naomi says something that I want us to see again. I just read it, but I want us to see. It's actually something I want us to take in for ourselves and absorb in our own hearts. Verse 20. Naomi says, may he be blessed by the Lord. What's it say? Whose kindness has not forsaken the living or the dead. The kindness of the Lord has not and will not forsake us. We see this in the New Testament very clearly. Hebrews chapter 13 tells us that we're to be content with what we have because the Lord has said, what? I will never leave you nor forsake you. Be content with what you have because, listen, I'm not going anywhere. I'm with you. I'm extending kindness so that the kindness of the Lord poured out on us through his provision for us. He is near. He's powerfully active now. And so Naomi says, Boaz, he's a close relative of ours, one of our redeemers. This was part of the custom. We'll see this in the weeks to come. It was part of the custom in the times of the death of a loved one, especially if that loved one was a husband. Someone would stand in as the provider, the one who would maybe buy back the land from the widow when she couldn't afford it, or one who would at times even stand in as a husband if the family needed provision in that way. Naomi says, by the providence of God, a relative and a possible redeemer, that's who Boaz is. This is all a part of the powerful and active hand of God for us, over us, caring for us, extending kindness to us. And the chapter comes to a close with Ruth sharing the rest of the story with Naomi. I just get this picture of these two gals sitting down after a long night and they're sharing stories of what has happened. This is what has happened, and this is what he said, and this is how he promised to provide. God is present for Ruth and Naomi and how he's providing for all that they need and so much of what they want. And the story is not over yet. The author again leaves us hanging. We're told that Ruth gathered until the end of barley and wheat harvest, and she lived with Naomi. But what about after that? It just leaves us hanging, pushes us to keep reading. Did God continue to provide? Would Boaz be the only one who would stand in as a redeemer of sorts? Where does this go from here? Would the food that he provided be the kind of lasting satisfaction they would need? Or would that run out and would they have a need for something more? Or is this even talking about food? Is this something much bigger than that? This sets us up for what is to come. And the one in his loving kindness extending that toward us, not forsaking us. Friends, the providence of God is the almighty, ever-present power of God over all things as a loving Father. And as we mentioned last week, I want to just put it out there again, in our grief, and in our pain, and in our discouragement, and in the things that we're walking through day after day, it may be difficult to see that God is present and active in extending kindness toward us. At times, it can cause us to ask the question, if that's true, God, that you are present and active, then why this? It can push us in that direction. You feel that at times? I'm sure we all do. We then, I think, have to be pushed back to remember that, not that there's anything necessarily magical about catechisms, but push back to that question-answer sort of dialogue about the providence of God, that there's not a leaf or a blade. There's not a leaf from a tree or a blade of grass. There's not rain or drought. There's not fruitful and lean years, food and drink, health and sickness, prosperity and poverty. All things, in fact, come to us, not by chance. Hear that? Not by chance, but by his fatherly hand we experience it. Friends, our God is near. He's active. He's powerfully present with us. Do we believe that? It's not by chance that the events in our lives exist. But whatever it is that you're walking through, it's not by chance that exists. They are from God's fatherly care for you, for me, for us. And when we're unable to see it that way, we wait and we hope and we long for the coming of the Redeemer who will restore all things. And when we struggle to hope and we struggle to wait and we struggle to hold on to faith, we gather with us people around us who will believe and have faith until we're able. There's a beautiful satisfaction coming from the perfect Redeemer who will never forsake us. Let's pray. God, we're thankful for your word. We know that your word is true. We want to learn more of you in it. We want to see more of you in it. We want to be drawn in to this relationship with you because of it. And so I pray that you would open our hearts to receive it. And God, my prayer this morning is that as we consider the things that we have just walked through in the book of Ruth, that we would not see them as, yeah, that's good for her and that's good for them and that worked out well, but that we have a God even now, right now, who is with us, who is present, who will not leave us or forsake us. All of the details of our lives are under the caring, loving hand of a good Father who's near, shown us his nearness in his Son. It's through Jesus that we can see you. Shown us his care and that Jesus left the Spirit so that we could know more of Jesus. God, I pray for my friends this morning who are struggling to experience your presence, your nearness to them. Would you lift that burden? Would you right now very, very clearly show them that you are near? That they would experience that we would, and that would turn us to then worship you because of it. Help us to see that in all of our days, we ask all this in the name of Jesus. Amen.